vegetables, bread, and meat so that it's a balanced meal because it's an investment. You don't want to give them meager portions. You want to keep them well fed. Go ahead.
The factory, I think that they could only eat vegetables when they were in the plantation.
No, in the plantation it says meat, vegetables, and bread. And like I just stated, the overseer's responsibility is to be sure that their meals include meat, vegetables, and bread. There is no stipulation for the type of food you're going to eat when you're a factory employee in the Lewiston factory rules. Did you want to say something?
No.
Okay. So, go ahead. So, generally speaking, which conditions do you think were more favorable? Which conditions would you rather work under or live under?
Plantation.
No, factory because they have the
Freedom.
the option of leaving. And in a plantation, these could be the rules, but this is not exactly how they were.
You're not sure how the reality reflects in what you've just read.
Yes.
And at least the plantation or the factory worker has the freedom to come and go. What are the strengths, let's say, of the contract for the slaves?
They don't have to pay.
Food.
Okay, they're guaranteed food, they're guaranteed housing. What else? Clothing.
Standard of living.
Okay, they're basically their needs, their basic needs are all guaranteed. Right, they're being sustained. They have beds, they have fireplaces. They're guaranteed things like pots and pans, clothing, change of outfits, even their children.
We'll never change. We'll always be the same.
Yeah, you don't
if you
choose.
work in a factory, if you lose your job,
You choose your house, you choose your clothes.
You will, as a factory worker, you have more choice.
Yeah.
But choice, you have also the freedom to fail, right? But you have more freedom. What are the strengths of being the factory worker besides freedom?
You can, like,
You can decide your job.
yeah, you
You-
can.
good.
If you want.
Social mobility, yes.
Yes, because when people go to a factory, I mean, many of them actually go with the objective, as Maricruz said, that they are going to succeed in life, that they're going to get better. But when you're a slave, well, you're supposed to remain stable your life.
Yes.
Right.
In factories, there is more motivation to work.
Okay, because you see that there's room for social advancement and mobility and movement where maybe there isn't. I mean, but you know, there was some social mobility for slaves, and we mentioned this already, and you read about it, where some slaves are given freedom by their masters. Okay, this is a minority, but it still happened. And then certain slaves that actually had jobs on top of their tasks they had to complete for their masters made money on their own, and some slaves even bought their own freedom. So there was room for social mobility. And there's cases where you have free blacks owning black slaves. Okay, go ahead.
Then also in the factories, if they didn't follow the rules or mistreated you, you could do something about it.
You're not going to leave.
In the factory, if you don't follow the rules,
You can quit or you can, like...
you can quit. Nobody's going to whip you, right? There's no corporal punishment, or at least there shouldn't be.
No physical. Oh.
There's no physical threat
and
of
the
violence.
factories are, like, since they had a contract, they have to follow the rules in the plantations if they want to treat the slaves badly and not give them food or anything that is they promised.
Good. Excellent. Another thing that isn't really mentioned is because slaves are property, what don't they have access to if there's a dispute between the slave and master? Courts. Okay, workers in factories, even though they're, according to what we've seen, they're not guaranteed much, they still have access to legal recourse. If their employer breaks the contract, they can try to take the employer to, bless you, they can try to take that employer to court. They can try to get their just due, right? Whatever it is that they're owed. Yeah.
For example, rules like student forbidden or when people can drink factory, they kick them out of the factory because they did one of those. They just kick him out, and if the person tries to take them, the one that was fired takes the owner of the factory to court. Well, they said, well, this is in the rules.
It's in the rules, exactly. It's stated clearly in the rules, so you don't have a leg to stand on.
Also, something that really came out to me was that it said the honorably discharged.
Right. Now, this goes to employment, and even myself, because you guys know I'm moving on after this year from Costa Rica. I have references. Just like the school I worked at previously. When this school was interviewing me, they contacted my references at this is my school in Connecticut, right? They want to know, how's Mr. Caffarella? What does he bring to the table? You know, how is he as an employee? How is he as a member of the community? Well, I left on good terms, so I had strong recommendations. Just like I'm going to leave here on good terms, because now whoever ends up hiring me, they're going to be contacting this school, asking those same questions. So I'm going to be discharged, if you will, honorably, right? I'm going to leave honorably. I told them with plenty of time in advance. They knew I was leaving and I'd done a good job. Versus not doing a good job, leaving abruptly. You know, when you go to get jobs, no matter what the jobs are, people want references. Oh, where did you work before? I'd like to contact your boss. And they say, oh, Daniel, he was always late. He would come to work and then work, you know, maybe 3/4 of the time. The other 1/4, he was screwing around on his phone. No one's going to want to hire you. So it's important to maintain good relationships with your employer, because you're going to be reliant on them even when you're done working for them. And that's what they're talking about. And this brings us to 2 weeks. To leave the job at the factory, you have to give them 2 weeks' notice, right?
Yes.
Where a slave, you don't have that freedom. Right, so it's not mentioned. Okay. What about commonalities that you saw? Go ahead.
They both have to send, tell their overseers if they're not going to go work that day for any reason.
Okay, so they both have to report directly to overseers immediately in the morning. Okay, the slaves actually right outside of their living quarters. The factory workers, they're right outside the factory gates. Yeah.
They both had strict work hours.
Strict hours of labor. Okay, Casafont?
They have to work every day.
Well, as far as we know, they have to work every day. Because it doesn't stipulate what days, it just stipulates hours, 11 hours. But usually Sundays would be the day off that both would have. Okay? And then in some other extreme cases, people would be working 7 days a week. But Sunday, the day of rest. Right? Go ahead.
They both had overseers, and they weren't allowed to do any other activity during their work hours.
Okay. Overseers, they're not allowed to participate in any other activity during work hours, and the overseers are doing what? Overseeing, or they're under constant surveillance. Are you surprised by how similar these rules are, or do you think that they're not so similar?
I think they're really similar because, like, both working spaces want to be really, like, they want to be completely under control of their employees.
They are similar,
Good.
but at the same time they're different because they are adapted according to the conditions that they have for their workers, what you can do to them, what you can't.
Okay, good.
How do you write the employees?
EMPLOYEES. Go ahead.
I feel like the factory is like a slave place with more limits.
Okay, so you feel like the factory is very representative of a plantation with more limits? Or fewer limits?
No, with more limits to the overseers and how they treat
okay.
them.
Yeah,
So more limits to how they can be treated by their overseers.
Yeah, but they have more freedom.
But they also have more freedom. Okay, you want to say something?
Freedom?
Yeah, that I think they
Yeah,
are
because they can just leave.
kind of similar, but only when written.
They're similarly written.
Written, yeah, and but
In practice.
living on like when you see them being applied,
They're applied very differently. Here's the button. Go ahead. Okay. Okay, very good. Was any of this surprising to you guys? Press it again.
Because we're used to it.
Huh?
No, because we're used to it. It's like similar to the rules we follow today in everything.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily a job, but school too.
Yes.
So you have to report to a teacher.
Okay, now last question. Kind of bringing it all together. When you look at all these rules, the similarities, the differences, essentially what are they there for? In both cases, why are they there? What's the reasoning? Go ahead, Casfont.
Maintain order.
Maintain order and control and
Make the masters get more money.
yes, which increases what? Profit, but how do you increase profit? Productivity. This is very strict codes of conduct to encourage and promote productivity. In both cases, there's differences. In both cases, there's similarities. But essentially, it's a code of conduct. Rules, duties. Things that you have to do, and then things that you cannot do. But the bottom line is increasing productivity to increase profits, right? And to overall make the owners, whether they be plantation owners or mill owners, more money. Yes?
No, yeah.
Final thoughts, comments? All right, we're going to transition. I'm going to kill this because we're going to actually watch a couple songs. We're going to be talking about now coping mechanisms that African slaves use to deal with slavery. What's a coping mechanism or coping strategy? What does it mean to cope?
To be able to sustain their job and at the same time feel better by themselves.
Okay, so in this case, to be able to maybe sustain themselves and their work, but to improve their overall quality of life. What does it mean to cope, though, in your lives?
To cope what?
To cope in your life. What does that mean? How are you coping? If you're coping, what do you have to do, Casafant? Adapt.
You have to take your mind off.
Yeah. Take your mind off of a situation or your problems. You know, when someone in your family dies, you have to cope with that. And we've probably, maybe all of us now experienced that in a tragedy in our lives, where you have to find ways to deal with it. Okay? Healthy coping strategies, like you said, exercise, and then unhealthy things like substances. And we're going to look at one of the most kind of culturally significant coping strategies to come out of the African American slave experience, which are songs called Negro spirituals, or sometimes African American spirituals. So for the next 25 minutes, I'm going to give you lyrics, we're going to listen to a couple songs, and then we're going to analyze these songs. I guess I should ask you before we begin, let me go back to this thing here. Quickly. What makes songs good primary sources?
From the perspective of the blacks.
Well, in general. This is going to be, you're right, from the perspective of the slaves, but in general.
They demonstrate, they show the feelings of the people.
They show the feelings of the people at that time. Their primary sources. David.
Yeah, it's similar, like to have a direct connection with what's happening there.
It gives us a window into the context of the actual events.
And their emotions.
And their emotions. It gives us real, sincere feeling. Right? It's not something that we're reading about 150 years removed from the actual events that we are discussing. So, I'm going to turn this thing off, and we're going to transition. And next time, I will have a GoPro on my head.